Daddy,
Hmm?
I don't know which one of the pills I gave you. But aspirin never hurt anyone, did it?
Oh, no, honey. It never hurt anyone.
Good evening, guys and ghouls, and welcome back to Monster Craze Memoirs, a generational podcast about B-movies. I'm your host, Ian Garcia, and joining me as always is my father, Rocco.
Hello.
So this week we watched two more movies, The Monster of Piedras Blancas from 1959 and The Vampire from 1957. I think we'll go ahead and open with The Monster of Piedras Blancas just because I don't know that there's very much to say about this one. Like, what did you think of revisiting it all these years later? What is your opinion of this one?
Well, no, I mean, when you're younger, everything looks great. I thought it had some elements to it. I think the
monster looks pretty good.
The monster looks pretty good. I think some of the surprising scenes of the way it emerges, it's the way it startles the viewer. If you initially see it, where it comes out of the cold locker where they keep the meat.
Yeah, you only see it from the waist down at first.
Right, the perspective, right. So you really don't get it. So there are a number of good touches to it, but overall, there's something weak. I can't put my finger on it, but there's weakness in the script and the story. It just seems like there's no compelling interest in any of the characters.
Yeah.
Maybe that's it.
I mean, I think it's a composite of a lot of things going wrong at the same time.
Yeah.
For instance, I think, well, number one, it seems that the script itself seems to have been pretty shoddily and quickly thrown together. It very much has this, I guess if I didn't know a little bit more about the production history of the movie, I wouldn't have gotten the same feeling from it. But knowing the production history, I do know that it very much feels like a kind of movie that was more or less done to give people work rather than to actually be a really not that a lot of these movies are particularly refined or nuanced narratively, but this one, there's a lot of elements to it that seem to just be... It's weird, because there's a lot of actual individual elements going on in the story. It's about a lighthouse keeper who is it opens with a lighthouse keeper who is sort of the outsider of his town, is sort of known for having a bad reputation because he's just mean. He's surly and isolated from everybody. He has a daughter who is having a secret love affair with a town marine biologist. There is a detective who is trying to solve a series of gruesome murders that are beginning on the beach near the lighthouse and then slowly spreading throughout the town. There's a lot of, and it seems that there's a lot of I think one of the big things I noticed was that there at one point the lighthouse keeper has a dog who disappears about midway through the movie. And it's never really addressed until just randomly one of the characters, the lighthouse keeper's daughter, just sees the dead body of the dog. But it's just kind of revealed that the dog is dead. But it's not revealed at a particularly opportune moment so that it's tense. It's not like the dog's body is discovered and it's part of the early establishing tension of all of these lives being lost. It's literally, we're already deep into the climax of the movie where of course there's a monster responsible for all these murders, and then they just say, and then in the middle of this entire climax where they're already in the midst of hunting the creature, suddenly the character says, "Oh, there's the dead dog," and it's literally 35 feet away from the lighthouse. Someone could have found this dead dog.
Well,
there was really no point in even bringing it up
I know,
again.
maybe I understand that, and maybe I'm not too... I don't want to malign the picture as bad as it is to
Yeah.
any point.
I mean,
But
it's not as bad as the
I
Hand
think-
of Death.
I
Let's
think-
just be clear about that.
That's true. But I think what's interesting is that the Sturgis, played by John Harmon,
Who's Sturgis again? 'Cause
Sturgis was a lighthouse guy.
Yeah, okay.
But it's interesting. It's not clear whether he became surly because he knew about the creature and was keeping it, and therefore it was self-fulfilling, or the fact that it's independent. So that's
Well,
nothing.
there's like a whole background.
no
But
idea.
again, like a lot of this
Oh,
stuff
then he
is
says-
just
yeah, he says
there's
yeah.
there's a whole background.
Soliloquy.
His daughter is having an affair with the town
Not
marine
affair, but
by
he said,
a town
it's not affair.
Shut up! A town college student who is played by Don.
She's not married. She's
Rocco.
not having an affair. She's.
I
Having,
don't mean like an
Oh.
extramarital affair.
Okay,
I mean
well,
like an affair.
No,
Like that's an
not an
affair.
affair. They're
You
in
can
a
have an
they're in a
affair and not
relation-
be married.
in a relationship.
Fine, but they're keeping it secret, right? If you're
Sure, because the father would be pissed off that if he's
right. So if you're in a small town and you're like one of these old hens, and you're going to like snitch on like on like the daughter of a lighthouse keeper, what are you going to say? Are you going to say this girl is like she's all right? Fine, a
forget
tryst,
about
a
it.
tryst, whatever. But anyway,
Forget about it.
The point.
It's not important.
So she's actually dating
It's not
the
clear
man
what he
she's
does.
dating. He's a marine biologist.
Theoretically,
of some
but you
kind.
never quite clear where he works.
Yeah, where he's working in this town, like there's doesn't seem to be a university nearby. Like there's really only two set pieces in this movie. One is the lighthouse,
Which is cool.
and one is the general store, where they also keep and this is the thing, is that like they communicate that this is how isolated the town is that anytime they discover a body, and all of these bodies have been decapitated, by the way, they've all been surgically decapitated, and because they can't show anything, they take great expository pains to explain just how morbid the bodies are in the state they've been discovered in, but they just throw all the bodies into the freezer in the general store, which I guess communicates how small and insular this town is. But...
Also, I know how people could reach in there and get more meat.
Yeah, like isn't there has to be a cross-contamination issue here.
Not so much that, just the ski factor.
Yeah, but anyway,
so they keep.
yeah, like but
that's
more
not-
more to the point about
That's not unusual.
more to the point about
That's not unusual.
more
I
to
hate to say that.
fine, but more to the point about John Harmon's character. Is that there's a whole backstory that his daughter played by the relatively notorious
Jean Carmen. Right.
She delivers the entire backstory about how her father, like his wife, like died sort of prematurely or something, but that's the thing, is like there's all this expository stuff that's supposed to like inform the tensions between the characters. Like apparently like Jean Carmen has only recently returned from spending 10 years at
20 years?
10 years. They say 10 years at
10
some
years.
point
Makes
in the
sense
movie.
because you have to make her younger.
Yeah, she's been at a boarding school
Right.
because she's like a kind of a troublemaker, but then
No,
that's
she's a free spirit of swimming, and of course he knows about the creature.
right, and he does. She's too free spirited, so he wants to protect her
Right.
from the monster of Piedras Blancas.
Right.
But like, there's also a whole backstory about how his wife died, which does not seem to be connected to the monster in any way.
No.
But like, then there's also this element of how he's been feeding the monster.
Right.
And it's like all of this is communicated in exposition. None of it is really shown or demonstrated. That he basically explains that like in his loneliness and isolation, he's developed like some sort of like a kind of paternal affinity for the monster as basically the only person who actually like shares his isolation, which is all undermined by the fact that he has a perfectly good dog. Like, I'm not sure why, like, you know, like the man's best friend isn't good enough. Why he needs the fish man to
It doesn't make sense at all. But I guess because it's more of the secretive element, that there's something about him that's unique. It gives him uniqueness. The dog doesn't.
Presumably, it's also because the creature is hominid. That it's presumably it's
Well, he
because
doesn't know
it's
that, does he?
Well,
Has he ever seen it?
Yeah, of course he's seen it. He's seen it.
I
He's
have no
feeding the
idea. I
fucking.
have
Yeah, again, I guess
Just-
you don't know.
You don't know because you know that people died, and well, I can't remember what he said. Something about
Yeah,
oh,
Don Sullivan mentions briefly, like, there's a whole, like, he just lets it, as an aside, like, oh, we don't know if this creature, like, has a conscience, or if it's just a wild animal or something. It's very much
not a conscience, whether it thinks.
right, whether it thinks, whether it's capable of complex thought, or
Right,
if it's just
which
behaving
makes it more
randomly.
dangerous if it's
Right,
so
and
complex.
that's, yeah, and so there's all sorts of, like, little elements
And
of-
yet they're going to lay meat out so they could drop a net on it. Now what?
Yeah, like, they just this plan to capture the monster is pretty simple. But again, all of this stuff is just this
Right.
expository information is just sort of dropped in at times that seem opportune, that I guess must have seemed opportune to the filmmakers, but aren't really arranged in such a sequence that they feel motivated. Like, I don't know why in the midst of this climax, why it's appropriate, because at one point, basically, John Harmon gets the lighthouse guy. He gets assaulted by the monster, which does not
We
kill.
don't know that.
No, we do know that. They discover him on the beach unconscious, and presumably he was attacked by the monster. And then, so like, I guess again, it's like all these. He's attacked by the monster, but it
It's
doesn't
not
kill
clear,
him.
though, is it?
The monster. That's the
It
interesting
looks
thing.
like he fell because the monster would have taken his head off and drank his
No,
blood.
but then later the monster doesn't take his head. The monster just throws him off the
Well,
lighthouse.
that's different because he's being surrounded and he's being attacked. So he just wants to kill him.
No, see, this is the thing. I think this is the thing. Is that, like, I think the issue is that the script is kind of just slapped together.
Right.
But you can see like the certain elements of the filmmakers gesturing at something a little more nuanced, where, like, the monster, it's not enough for the monster to feed on the lighthouse keeper, because the lighthouse keeper is the one who's been feeding the monster scraps that he collects from from Kochek, the general store keeper. Kochek, another one of these another one of these Eastern European stereotype characters who has to be the one that
He's
says,
the butcher.
yeah, who has to be the one who says, nope, you think this is just a regular accident or murder, but there's clearly it's the legendary Monster of Piedras Blancas. But yeah, so he's been feeding scraps, but then Kochek just decides that at one fateful day, Kochek just sells the scraps to another person. So now, with no more scraps to feed the monster, now the monster is on a rampage, which only raises the question of what the monster was doing before this lighthouse keeper was there to start feeding him scraps. Nothing. But that's what I mean is that, like, but then there's also, I think
It's weakly written.
I think the
it's
fact that the monster specifically does not try to eat Harmon, that he doesn't try to take off his head, I think that's an allusion to the fact that the monster, it's personal between them. Like, the monster has, like, this wrath against, or is supposed to be. Like, none of it really fits together because, again, the screenplay feels like, and it very much was really slapped together more or less to just give people work. Basically, the backstory of this movie is that the producer of the film is a guy named Jack Kevin, Kevan. I'm not sure if that's the right way to pronounce it.
Probably.
And he was an assistant makeup artist who, well, he began his career as an assistant makeup artist. He did some uncredited work on The Wizard of Oz. After his contract was up at MGM, he went to work for Universal. And there he basically did most of his work. He was a creature design and makeup and costume constructor for a lot of Universal's science fiction B movies of the period. He did the monster effects for Revenge of the Creature Walks Among Us, This Island Earth, The Mole People, and The Monster on the Campus. So he's the producer of the film, and he also created the monster in this film. And you can tell that, like, even the construction of the monster itself, the body looks very similar to the creature from the Black Lagoon. the hands of the monster are clearly taken, and also the dome sort of egg-shaped head it has are clearly taken from molds that were used previously for the mole people. And the feet of the monster are taken from molds of the costume for the what's it called? The Metaluna mutant from this island, Earth. So literally the monster itself is a composite of previous Universal monsters. Irvin Berwick, the guy who directed it, he was just a dialogue coach and assistant and uncredited dialogue coach and director for Universal. The screenwriter H. Hale Chase only had one previous writing credit to his name. He, again, like Berwick, he was a dialogue coach. Philip H. Lathrop, he's
Cinematography.
Who was the cinematographer for the film. He does a pretty good. He does all right, like, you know. But the point being is that the very small crew that worked on this film, they were all former Universal employees who were fired in 1959. Because at this point, Universal was in a period of deep. They were in dire straits at this point in their history. Like in just the previous year, at one point they were even forced to shut down production completely, and a lot of employees, mostly technicians, and especially those who worked in low budget film divisions, like the kinds that would make these sort of creature feature monster movies, a lot of them ended up getting laid off. And basically, this movie is basically, again, it's like, you know, that's what I mean by, if I didn't know the production history, I don't know that I would necessarily have this feeling that this was a movie that was made just to give people work. But it was more or less a movie that was made literally just to give people work. It was a...
Maybe.
Like the Van Wyck Productions, the studio that's on the credits, that's literally just Kevin and Berwick's startup company. And while unofficially it's their own production, unofficially Universal actually gave the production of the film a lot of sweetheart deals in terms of renting production vehicles and equipment for the film, basically as a salve to their laid off workers who were trying to, like, you know, keep themselves solvent and try to survive the economic decline that Hollywood was going through at the time, where less people were being hired because progressively over the course of the 50s, a lot of major studios were simply shuttering a lot of their low budget film divisions, concentrating more on less and less productions, more and more on and of course, the classical studio model at this point is more or less in free fall. Like, by the 1960s, the classic studio system would basically be completely replaced by a new emergent model of the multimedia conglomerate. Like, even at the time, eventually, by mid-1962, Universal itself would just be taken over by 1962, Universal would be owned by MCA, the Music Corporation of America, and then they eventually bought Decca Records, so there was this merger which basically foreshadows the rise of the multimedia conglomerate. The idea that there really aren't any movie studios anymore. There are movie companies that are merely the subsidiaries of larger conglomerates that all work in a kind of tandem that are primarily there to increase the stock portfolios of people who invest in these multimedia corporations. So the Monster of Piedras Blancas is more or less just a film that was slapped together very quickly just to give work to all of these people who had been, in the meantime of this economic process of consolidation and merger, just to give work to all of these people who had basically had their livelihoods just, ripped out. The rug had just been ripped out from under them. So you get the feeling of that, I think, from the film, just in terms of how sloppily the narrative, kind of fails to cohere.
Right. It doesn't really. Yeah. It's not. I don't know. When you're a kid, it's a monster movie. So but you're right. It just doesn't. There's no compelling interest in any of the characters. You know, the only compelling creature thing is the monster. I mean, so it's it's you're right, but it's all right. It's a monster movie, so it wasn't too bad.
There is a particularly gruesome scene where you do see the monster carrying around the decapitated head of one of the supporting characters.
Right.
You know, all sorts of little things.
It's Eddie. Eddie's head.
Eddie's head.
Eddie's head. Eddie went into the thing looking right.
Yeah. But yeah, that's more or less the Monster of Piedras Blancas. I don't think a lot more needs to be said about that one.
I don't know. I like Don. Again, Don, what's his name?
Don Sullivan?
Don Sullivan. I like, we saw him in a couple other movies.
He
Just died recently.
You know, he wasn't a great actor in
No,
the Giant Gila Monster, but in this one, like, he's even worse. So
He was.
so I'm starting to appreciate that, like, you know, all right, maybe
I think it's the script.
like, what does he have to work with? Like,
wasn't much to
but
hold
also
on to,
you can see that, like, a lot of this stuff was just, like, one and done it takes. Like, there's entire, like, moments of dead air between, like, nothing really feels natural about the performances. This was obviously not anything that was, like, rehearsed to any extent or was really planned out. You know, there's a very stilted unnaturalness to everything that's going on, and all of the acting pretty much suffers for it. But, you know, I guess Don's, you know, and that's the thing, Don Sullivan, you know, he, again, the story itself is incredibly unfocused. You would think there would at least have been some attempt to maybe just streamline the story just a little bit more. I don't know. Like, I don't know quite how you would do it, but I guess it would be to more focus on Don Sullivan and Gene Carmen's relationship and how that plays off of the hostilities of his father, rather than, you know, interpolating all of these other extraneous characters, like the constable who's investigating all the murders, and then Kochek, who's the forewarning guy who's like, it's the Monster of Piedras Blancas. Like, the movie was just shot in 6 days, and they were doing 16-hour days just to put this movie together. So I guess it gives you an impression of why it feels as slapped together as it does. But the other film we watched this week, The Vampire, that was from 1957. That was a much better picture. It's in the mold of the werewolf, sort of, isn't it? It's again a sort of classical gothic horror monster, but putting a modern, loose, scientific spin on it. Do you want to try to explain the plot of the movie?
It's a plot where there's a guy that's experimenting with regression serum to help, and as the Beaumont, the psychiatrist, tries to, played by Dabbs Greer, Beaumont explains that, an excellent Dabbs Greer,
no one's
going
to know who Beaumont is. All right,
so the psychiatrist who says that the reason why he was working on the serum was to.
All right, wait, just stop.
You told me to start.
I know I told you to start, but you're not doing a good job.
I'm saying the reason is because he accidentally takes a pill that's meant to be one of these serum things to causes regression, or thinks he's onto something, but the guy says, but he dies, sort of like the alien in Men in Black. It isn't quite clear what he's trying to say, right? So he's trying to tell the guy that he's warning. And then you hear all this exposition that it's habit forming, and this thing actually turns him into a vampire because somehow the serum is derived from vampire bats, and somehow there's a virus contamination. It's a mix, but it doesn't really matter the reason, does it? Because like you said, it's a story about addiction.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really good metaphor for addiction. I think it's cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's like it's very much like the hideous sun demon, where it's almost entirely transparent in a way that the primary dramatic concern of the movie is not necessarily the story of a small town local physician who accidentally takes a pill that turns him into a modern day vampire.
He has migraine.
Yeah, he has migraines and he takes headache pills to deal with them.
Yeah.
He gets called because
he gets by accident. It's an accident.
There's a little. There's a little. Okay, so let me try to rewind so that I can provide a little more clarity. Basically, the movie opens. A kid is delivering animals to a local doctor who's doing experiments into some kind of regression therapy using animals, or some kind. This kid is delivering animals. He discovers the doctor isn't well, that he's not lucid, that he's just lying on his couch, and he's on the midst of death. He runs and gets John Beale, who plays Dr. Paul Beecher, the protagonist of the film. John Beale rushes over, not in time to save the guy. The scientist gives him this vial of pills, which are the regression pills that are derived, as you said, from vampire bat serum.
Right.
And of course, in the logic of all of these movies, if you take something which is an extraction from an animal, you will inevitably turn into some composite that is based on the animal that it's derived from, which is only rational. And so John Beale, he's having a headache when he goes back to his office because he's the only physician in this town. He's a single father.
Single father.
Raising a very precocious daughter.
Right. And
very smart daughter, not a stereotypical lilting
and she takes
flower.
Care of him,
and she does her part to take care of her father.
Makes him breakfast in the morning and things like that.
And she accidentally gives him the vial of
because he says
the vampire pills.
Go to my bot pocket and get the pills out because I'm having a headache. And he forgot that he pocketed in either pocket, so she gives him the pill. And then that night is the first night. That night is he turns into a vampire. I wasn't really clear on what the actual terms of it was, because it seems that it doesn't make any sense.
Because that's the thing, is that when he does take the pill, he becomes the vampire.
And when he doesn't,
but when he doesn't take the pill,
and he waits too long, he becomes a vampire.
Right. So it's he has this profound. But that's the thing I'm wondering, is that is it that taking the pill makes him a vampire the first time? So I think the point was supposed to be that he could avoid it, but the problem is that the pill is also incredibly habit-forming.
Yes.
That he has a profound desire to use the pill because it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It makes the migraines go away. It gives him it makes the pain go away.
Right.
But he turns into a monster that goes out into the night and hunts down and murders people.
Right.
And so what you see in the movie is, again, it's very much like the Hideous Sun Demon, where it's much less about him turning into a vampire, although there's plenty of that, as it is about just watching the complete physical and psychological unraveling of John Beale spends a lot of time in this movie just looking an absolute mess, just sweating all over the place, completely disheveled.
A person in dread, right?
A person in.
And he started off that way, even before he became addicted. It's very clearly
he's on the breaking point.
He's something he's starting to be worn down by the demands of being a physician in a small town where people aren't paying him, because he has a poor population.
Yeah, there's an almost it's a wonderful life quality to it. You pay when you can, and you pay what you can. Even if it's not money, you can use something. I'll take it.
Right.
He's like George Bailey. He's a victim of his own good nature.
Right.
Janie, haven't you learned that silly tune yet? You play it over and over again. Now stop it! Stop it!
Oh, Daddy, you just gotta watch this.
I'm not watching anything, and why aren't you in bed?
But please, I just learned how.
No. And turn off that stupid record.
But, Daddy...
Did you hear me? Turn it off.
There's some interesting characters in it, though. I think that... and some of them are quite comical if you listen to their explanation, like the guy, Henry Winston, Dr. Winston, who plays the sidekick of the researcher... Beaumont, Will Beaumont.
Will Beaumont is a psychiatrist who's called in to basically sort out the affairs of the doctor who's working in this town. Called up from the so a much more accurate portrayal than Don Sullivan as just being this marine biologist student who's just in this podunk town. There's a sense of actual social relationship. We get a good understanding of the social ecosystem of this town and how it's related to how it's sort of isolated from the rest of the world and how people sort of can come in and out of it. but everything is sort of self-contained.
Yep.
But yeah, Will Beaumont, played by Dabbs Greer.
That's not a good performance. Dabbs
Yeah,
Greer
he's
is
very
always-
good in it.
always
Very
consistent-
good in it.
Consistent. Very consistent actor. In many things.
I think he might even be the standout performance of the film.
Yeah, because even Kenneth Tobey, who plays the sheriff, he's a little weak in this. I liked him in the terror. What do you call it?
The Terror from Beyond Space?
No,
Kenneth Tobey plays the sheriff in the movie who's
Right. investigating
investigating the murders. Yeah, he's been in a lot of... The Thing from from Another Planet.
The Thing
He
from
plays
Another World.
He plays
Much-
Captain Patrick Hendry in
much
that
better.
movie.
Much better in that movie. He's more of an.
He also plays Air Controller Neubauer in Airplane. So that might be where a lot of other people recognize
Right.
him. He was also in...
also, he was in.
It Came from Beneath the Sea.
He's also in Billy Jack. He played the sheriff in Billy Jack,
Yeah.
where Billy Jack gets punched out in the opening scene. He was much older then.
Yeah, he's been in a lot of shit. But yeah, he's
But
pretty...
that's one place where you see, in that Billy Jack, you see his tremendous red hair. They always said he had remarkable red hair. And it is startlingly red.
After years of only seeing this man in black and white,
Yes.
to suddenly realize
His
you are
hair
shockingly
is
ginger.
Red. He is red like you wouldn't believe. And it's kind of interesting because it shows up in that picture on Billy Jack in that movie.
Yeah, he's not as good, but yeah, definitely Dabbs Greer is a standout performance. He almost has, like, the way he's playing this character, like, he's this very aloof...
Yes.
And he's, like, a very classically Freudian psychiatrist. Like, it's, like, obviously a lot of his lines are more or less just like a screenwriter's half... like their Google Translate version of what an actual psychiatrist might say in the 1950s. And he plays it off. He plays it off very self-awarely.
Yeah, but I was like, what? Did you hear what he just said about the fact that Henry Winston, the reason he's wearing glasses is because his mother was set on fire or something like that.
Yeah, he has a mysterious assistant named Henry Winston who is always wearing sunglasses, not because it's medically necessary, but because it's like a psychological crutch.
Mm-hmm.
And like his theory is that the reason he does that is because his mother burned to death, and so now the sight of light and fire disturbs him pathologically.
What? Did you just hear what he said?
Yeah, it's very weird. But like
snicking, and Dabbs Greer just delivers it like he's telling you, I got 2 brown shoes on.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing is that the way Greer plays this character, you can't quite tell if the character is supposed to be messing with you or if he's giving you the honest truth.
Right.
Because he seems to have a self-awareness as a psychiatrist that he is dealing in a very imprecise science. Where, of course, everything in this movie is an imprecise science, but like him in particular, he seems to understand that, like, the science of the mind is a little more complicated than what
in his own way, he's like a little crazy in that, in terms of being aloof about all things, because he works in psychiatry.
And the thing that you realize is that it's really more of just an exposition of his own crazy imagination, because you realize that, like, he just really likes working with what's the guy's name who plays the assistant?
Well, he says he's brilliant. James Griffin, who plays Henry Winston.
Yeah, James Griffin. Like, and this is the thing when I was watching the movie, like, their relationship, did you get the sense that, like, Beaumont's character was supposed to be, like, in a weird way, like, maybe coded, like, closet homosexual?
No.
I don't know. Like, it just,
No. I didn't get that.
He does, I don't know, maybe I'll splice in a little audio of him talking, but he does seem to have a very sort of campy,
he says something
lilting
about,
quality.
He's got an odd, don't worry, he's a bit odd. He tells the Beale character that he's a bit odd.
Yeah.
He's brilliant.
Henry,
You want something?
the animals are dead.
Yes, I know.
That's Henry for you, phlegmatic, but seething inside. Brilliant mind, brilliant. He's just the person to carry on.
Well, what exactly was Campbell working on?
Didn't he tell you?
Well, only briefly. I know it had something to do with instincts, reactions.
Yeah, well, that's about it. Hey, come in.
Dull knife. I cannot work with a dull knife.
Henry complains a lot, but deep inside he's a frightened child seeking approval.
And so, yeah, they come in to investigate. And, and it's great because, like, he's just... It's wonderful because they first meet John Beale's character, Paul Beecher, because Paul Beecher, like, he starts to realize that he's taken the wrong medicine, and so he goes back to the scientist's flat. And so, like, and then Beaumont just walks in on him there, just standing around in the dark, having snuck into this house. And he just acts like nothing is amiss. And then the same thing happens later during the climax of the movie. He just comes back to the house and finds Paul Beecher just standing there in the dark, and he's just completely aloof to anything.
What's he say? I guess we shouldn't have given you a key, or we should give you a key.
We should give you a key. Like, yeah, there's this weird kind of like
he drops the lines.
Like he's so casually okay with all of the weird sort of anomalies, and that's what I mean. Is that like he almost has like a kind of perverse, like almost like a morbid curiosity about what's going on that just doesn't penetrate. But then what's interesting is that, like, once he realizes that John Beale is just completely cracking up, he completely changes character. And that's what I like about it, is that, like, there's a great sense of dimension to the characters that's communicated with very little, where suddenly this character, who has almost been comic relief for most of the movie, suddenly transforms into a caring, practiced physician who is now just trying to tell John Beale the only way you're going to get rid of this, because he's treating it like addiction. He's treating it like you're having a neurotic episode. All you need to do is fight it. And so that's what's fascinating, is that, like, so the climax of the movie basically boils down to him just staying in the basement of this house with John Beale all night and trying to stop him from taking the pill, and John Beale himself basically emulating the symptoms of withdrawal. He's going through physical pain, he's begging to be given the thing that he's...
Oh, come on, Will. Help me, I gotta have him. I can't do it, I can't wait like this. Can't you see what's happening to me?
I can't see any different except your state of mind. Now try to bear it just a little longer.
Oh, I can't. You gotta help me.
Look, I'm going to give you the sedative, Paul, in just a few minutes.
I need it now. Please. Please. Oh, please.
It's a very potent scene, and I think it's a wonderfully written movie.
It is.
Just in terms,
Dabs Greer's lines are brilliant. They're just...
Because there's some great kill scenes in the movie. There's some great...
All off camera.
Yeah, all of it is off camera. Mm-hmm. There's some great kills in it, but it's remarkable that for as good as the horror elements are, so much of the movie is much more, and so much of the emotion of it is much more derived simply from the character's emotional experience and their physical state. That, like, far more of, like, the anxiety it produces is just by seeing John Beale just totally breaking down.
Right.
And us feeling bad about it because we've seen that he's a good guy. You know, he's not like this, he's not like a lot of the scientists we've seen before in these movies, where he's just kind of cold
this
and
is
clinical.
Yep.
Yeah, like he's very much like, if there's any character who does not fit into the sort of stock trade of like the rational masculine hero of one of these old B movies, it's definitely John Beale. He is just, from the get-go, he is very much a guy who is just
even Monster on the Campus, the professor's a bit, how do you say, tart. He's
think about it. Like, how do these movies always establish? How do they always seem to establish the masculine credentials of these characters? They establish it through two ways. One is they give them a young, strapping male assistant or student protege who is almost there as like the son figure. Like they're there so that we can have this sort of male patrilineal, development. But then they also always give them a romantic interest. They always give them a girlfriend. So just to assure the audience, yes, this guy is an egghead, but don't worry, he fucks. Just to make sure everyone knows he's a man's man. John Beale is just a single father. And he has no girlfriend. He doesn't seem to have he doesn't have time for romantic interest. He has a thoroughly realistic life that is totally engulfed by his domestic responsibilities and his professional responsibilities. You get the sense that he doesn't have time for anything. Like, I can even think in, like, even in, like, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the local physician in that movie, like, even there you have to have this emphasis on the fact that he's a divorcee, and then this girl that had, like, his high school sweetheart, you know, we have this great burgeoning romance and sexual tension with them just to reinforce this idea of masculinity. But from the very get-go in this film, what we're given is a character who adheres to none of those sort of masculine ideals or tropes.
Right.
Which only makes it more tragic, really. Like, it's not even really a scary movie.
No, it's
you just
not.
like you just feel shitty for the guy.
Right. And again, it's a story of addiction. Like all addictions, sometimes the beginning is sometimes accidental.
Yeah.
And then it's one fix leads to another. It reminds me of the Man with the Golden Arm, which I did see with Frank Sinatra.
Like, this is very much the horror movie version of Man with the Golden Arm.
But there's no real instigating character like in the Man with the Golden Arm, where you have a
there's no pernicious, like, sort of slum influence.
A pusher, if you will.
Exactly. It literally, and I guess that fits because, like, you know, it's like, you know, it's
here it's all accidental, right?
And clearly from an allegorical perspective, the impression that it's giving is that addiction isn't just this thing that occurs out there, outside of precious middle-class society in the slums where all of the bad people live. It can occur within the official sanctioned auspices of credible scientific inquiry, and, you know, it's like, you know, like,
really good.
It's a wonderful and fascinatingly well-written movie.
And it's expertly edited. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's well directed, well edited, and I think, like, we had noticed, like, so, like, I was teasing it just a bit that he doesn't have a romantic interest. He does have a nurse played by Colleen Gray.
Mm-hmm.
She plays the nurse in the film.
Carol Butler.
And you almost get the sense that he's like, there's a little bit, you almost, like, this is the thing, you're preparing, knowing the conventions of these movies, you're preparing yourself for the fact that they're going to be the romantic pairing, that's what the conflict's going to be. She's going to try to save him from this, you know, crowning addiction. And there's even little elements of that, because when Kenneth Tobey comes into town, because apparently he's just the sheriff who's been called in. Apparently the town doesn't have a sheriff. Like, he has to be called in from, like, the major city, but he knows John Beale's character personally, and he walks in with Colleen Gray, and he's assuming that Colleen Gray is a patient because John Beale has lied to him about what his nurse looks like in order to prevent him from trying to, like, presumably just to joke with him or prevent him to try to hit on her.
I think it's just a joke, but I think it's cool because you notice how Kenneth Tobey is from a previous nurse that he had, right? Because his previous nurse was pretty.
Right.
And she left, and so he has someone for now, a new nurse. And when she looked like her, she's heavy, she's fat, she's got wears glasses. And he is toying with him.
Yeah,
it's not because there's no real romantic relationship between.
Yeah,
there's a dependency.
Yeah, it's strictly professional, but he does. And again, it's like technically he's the boss, but it's also like his relationship with his daughter. Like, there are 2 scenes in the movie where the daughter is preparing breakfast.
Right.
You know, like, you really get a sense that he's a guy who he does not have command over everything, and he has had to divvy out. In a very socially realistic way. In a way, it's not just something that's virtually never acknowledged in, like, let alone science fiction and horror movies at the time. This is like a realistic portrait of, like, a downwardly mobile middle class situation that you virtually never see addressed in films of the time.
No, well, I think it's each, you know, most of the characters are, I mean, well, it doesn't take many to be fully fleshed out to really give the movie its drive.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Beale's character and, of course, Dabbs Greer's character, and Ken Toby to some extent, but he's just tangential. It really is.
This is kind of like a perfect contrast to, like, at least in the level of like how many characters there are in the story and how many little relationships sort of bounce off of one another. It's a perfect contrast to what the Monster of Piedras Blancas is attempting, but very poorly, because you have all of the affectations of social tension, but none of the sense of motivation for these things to evolve and come out. Whereas here, it's a deftly written story where characters very much come to interact with each other in a way that feels very motivated at a very critical moment. So the thing that I was thinking of in terms of John Beale's character as, like, just not fitting any sort of conventional masculine mode of the time is that idea that you're prepared for the idea that Colleen Gray is going to be his love interest. And there's even a scene in the film where he's trying to cure his dependency, so he thinks what he needs to do to distract himself from it is he gives her the pills under the pretense that they're his migraine pills and says, let's just go out for the night. We're just going to go out to the diner. We're going to have some drinks. We're going to have fun. And I'm going to forget that I'm a doctor for a second. And so there's this whole scene where it's like, you could see, and again, it's like she's dressed very pretty. He's, tried to dap her up a bit. He's loosening up a bit. Again, it's like this, in any other movie, this would be the basis for like this is like evidence of the burgeoning romantic tension.
Right.
But instead,
he's called away to do appendectomy. Right.
An appendectomy. And
he's pulled back into the style that's going to get him back.
And that's when he snaps. That's when you notice, like, he's doing fine until his responsibilities come in. Right. So you get the sort of allegorical, the motivation, it comes not from the science fiction. It doesn't come from, like, the power of the drug. It comes from the social responsibilities constantly crushing and weighing on his mind, that what's motivating him is this tremendous anxiety. And so instantly he transforms from a guy who is at least confident for a second. And again, you could imagine being a sort of classical male figure. But then he's instantly turned back into a wreck. And not only a wreck, he's turned into like a liar. And like, he like, it's so embarrassing and kind of mortifying how he goes about getting the pills again, because it's exactly the sort of artificial way that you imagine a person might do when they're addicted and they try to give up power to someone else, but then because they're not able to break their addiction, they need to engage in duplicity.
Right. Betray their trust and
betray their trust. Because what he does is he pretends he needs his cigarette lit.
No, right.
And she goes to her purse to reach for the lighter, and he just snaps and says, "I'll get it." Now, of course, in any scenario, there's no scenario where a man is just going to grab a woman's purse and reach in and grab out the lighter and take the cigarette. So even the ruse is not working. She's going to tell that something is going wrong. But, like, he's so desperate, and that just makes the scene feel more crushing and mortifying. That, like, and it's very subtle. Like, it's not like and of course he knocks the purse over, and he secretly takes the pills, and then like...
And the lighter.
And the lighter.
And he lights a cigarette, puts it back in...
So he goes to do this appendectomy, and again, it's just, like, this whole, like... And this is the thing, is that, like, these are all of these elements. It's very much like a Val Lewton movie, isn't it? Where the essential premise that Val Lewton was always operating under from Cat People on was that the world in which these movies take place needs to feel like people actually live in it. Mm-hmm. It's not enough that your protagonist just be a doctor. We need to see him at work.
Right.
And because we see him at work, suddenly we have this tension that has nothing to do with whether he's going to turn into a vampire. It has to do with the fact that...
He's going to kill somebody.
Yeah, exactly. He's performing surgery and he's not lucid. He's he's having withdrawal symptoms in the operating theater.
Right, and just tells him to go ahead, you close.
You close him up. Right. And everyone's just standing around like, what do you mean fucking close him up? Where are you going? Yeah, absolutely fascinatingly written.
Yep. Very complicated, very complex, and well done script. overall. Yes.
Yeah, I guess we should give credit here. The screenplay itself was written by a woman named Pat Fielder. I tried to look up to see what her previous writing credits might be. She seems to have done sort of a lot of work for TV during the 60s and the 80s. So she wrote 4 sort of B movies in this B horror mold from 1957 to 1958. So this is really tied in. Basically everything to do with the quality of the movie is tied in with the people who made it. So on the credits of the film, the company is called Gramercy Pictures. Now, Gramercy Pictures is the assumed moniker of this company that's made up by 3 guys: Jules Levy, Arthur Gardner, and Arnold Lavin. They were all United States Air Force buddies. They worked in the first motion picture unit making training films from 1942 to 1945. Training films for the Army. Once they get out of the Army, they all sort of go into the film industry, mostly as script supervisors and production assistants. But they always have this ambition that once they get out of the Army, what they really want to do is they want to start making movies. So the first movie they do is a very low-budget noir film called Without Warning in 1952. Lavin directs the film. It impresses this industry veteran named Saul Lesser, and he bought an interest in the trio's company, and he arranges a distribution deal with United Artists. And so they release a string of low to medium budget noir and drama films throughout the 50s. But eventually they come to a point where a lot of their ideas that they're developing are not ideas that Warner Brothers wants to pick up. And so they decide that, one of the things, they decide, all right, let's try going into the sci-fi and horror exploitation territory. So before they make they make 4 movies in this time. Those 4 movies are The Monster That Challenged the World,
Giant
which
Snails.
We've seen Giant Snails, yes.
It's a good movie.
It's a pretty good movie. It's like it only fails once it succumbs to the sort of dumb smart questions. Dumb smart questions like, how does a giant snail sneak up on somebody? It's massive. Anyway, but
right.
Yeah, so they made The Monster That Challenged the World. The Vampire was the second film they made. That was followed by The Return of Dracula, which is not related in any way to this movie, and The Flame Barrier, which is a much more science fiction oriented film. All of these were written by Pat Fielder during this time. 3 of them were directed by Paul Landries, who basically... Levin was the one who directed The Monster That Challenged the World, but he ultimately decided that he didn't want to direct a lot of these movies because he still had the ambition that he wanted to actually direct other kinds of movies, and he was worried that if he has too many of these B movies to his name, that it's going to get him, typecast out of the industry that he wants to really work in. So The Vampire is the second movie they made. It only costs around $115,000, which isn't too bad for one of these low-budget productions. And the thing about it is that, I was reading an interview between Lavin and a 1991 interview between Lavin and Tom Weaver, who is this film historian. Particularly specializing in these sort of B movies and exploitation movies from the 50s and the 60s. And Lavin is a guy who basically, he really prides himself in the fact that they were making these movies that were very low budget but that they were all, and not necessarily even in a different way than, say, AIP would do it. Literally, The Vampire was very much the same as, an AIP production. They had a title first, they wrote the script based on what their limitations were logistically and economically, and then they built the film around it. But they were very much these guys who prided themselves in the ability to deliver a movie that fundamentally, where, as Levin put it, where the money is up on the screen. Every little dollar that they had is going into making the movie look as good as possible. And so I think this is very much an example of a kind of film that you can only get when you have this right combination of filmmakers who are very pragmatic in what they're doing, but are clearly taking lessons from what has worked in movies that they actually like, rather than just depending entirely upon like a good poster to sell an inferior product. Like there's no element of the vampire that feels neglected. You know, whether it's character
no,
or...
it's very interesting. Even the end scene, it isn't the person who you suspect will kill the vampire, which is your Kenneth Tobey character, Sheriff Buck, whatever his name is.
It's just a fucking deputy.
His deputy, Herb, played by Herb. What's his name? Herb.
I mean, it doesn't really matter. He's not very much a character. But he's just a random extra.
Right.
Like he's a random one-line supporting
character. They're fighting, it goes boom, boom, boom. That's it. And so he's not even the one that kills him. It's kind of interesting.
It's like a very, it's a very
really well done.
very morbid and very almost anticlimactic because. Yep. And I guess it's a weird, like, you know, the way Fielder writes this script, and Tom Weaver...
Maybe that's the reason.
You know, Tom Weaver asks her about this in the interview that he's doing with a lot of them.
Because a woman wrote it. Maybe there's something to it.
I don't know. I mean, I think that definitely plays into the fact that the women characters in this movie are very well developed. The professional women in this movie, there's no scene in which they're randomly hit on. Right. And in fact, you do notice that merely putting in that element of the story where John Beale is just trying to play a trick on Kenneth Tobey's character by lying to him about how attractive his nurse is, it's almost like it's a workaround almost. Because if you don't have that, so rather than having a sequence which is about Kenneth Tobey, like all of these sci-fi men's men do in these movies. As soon as they see a pair of legs, they immediately start sexually harassing them. It doesn't matter what the context is, private, social, or professional.
There's even a scene where he has to break off the date, and she says, well, you know what, so do I.
Yeah, because like I got other shit to do.
He has to go exhume a body.
And she's got to go out with her boss.
Right, but she's saying but she's not going out with him. She's just
She just
wants to help him. Right?
Yeah, he's in need, and I'm I'm going to help him because he's my friend.
And I'm getting free dinner.
Yeah, exactly. So and that's the thing is that with that scene where Kenneth Tobey and her are introduced, instead of him just sort of berating her with come-ons, the way the scene is played is as her being like it seems like she's playing it very, very naturalistically, where you see how awkward she feels. You see how it's just like it's not attractive to her about him. Like eventually she does agree to go on a date with him, but it's only after and
it's off screen.
It's only it's off screen. It's so
because she tells the boss, oh, by the way, Buck is going to take me out to.
Right, so there's all of this social information that we're not aware of, but but you get this impression that like it's something that she comes to organically and of her own will, not what usually happens in these movies where a man just literally gives them no other choice but to go out with them.
Right, or it's an instantaneous kind of appeal.
And in fact, by introducing that element where Toby lies to him in order to make him look like a fool...
Beale lies to him.
Beale lies to Toby to make him look like a fool. Suddenly, this scene is changed to one where it's at Toby's expense because he thinks that he's just picking up on some random town girl, not that he's hitting on his boss's new
not boss, the doctor's
on his friend's new nurse.
Right.
Because it's a wonderful way of sort of realistically portraying the gender dynamics as they occur in the time, but in a way where the emphasis isn't just on this demonstration on bravado. The emphasis is on the absurdity of it. That like people are nuanced and complicated, and women are nuanced and complicated. They have professional and social and interpersonal lives that aren't just governed. They're not objects in this movie. They're not. They're like there's even there's even in the surgery room there's a female assistant, and as soon as he leaves and just tells the male assistant to close up the body, the first thing the male assistant does is look to the woman assistant like, did he mean me or you? It's like, who's gonna jump to it? Are you gonna help me out or what? Like, there's this...
Yeah, so again, I think it's tightly written to make sure all these little pieces not only get fit in, but that it fits like a puzzle.
Yeah.
Not like some you're just hammering stuff in, and it looks like like it's not fitting right.
Not just exposition
Right.
for the pretense of adding
Right. This is
dimension to
well
the
written, and
characters,
it-
like stuff that organically
Yeah,
follows
and it's
from.
written so well and directed so well, by the way.
Yeah, it's very well directed.
Because no matter what the writer says, the director can screw it up, and the director probably, to the T, probably followed whatever she had.
Yeah, Paul Landers and
Yeah.
Pat Fielder were clearly on the same wavelength here, and because Tom Weaver asked Pat Fielder if she was influenced by Val Lewton in any way, and she sort of says, yeah, I guess. I mean, Val Lewton's a really good filmmaker, but she credits Edgar Allan Poe a little bit more. She's much more interested in, again, she comes from a very classic Gothic horror tradition where it's much more about the inner turmoil and monstrosity that people can be driven to rather than any outward monster. But there's also this element, like we were talking about this, there is this very well done scene where the nurse is walking home at night after Beale has gone off to do the surgery, where she's just walking in the middle of the night alone. And we noticed during the scene, it's like dead ringer, this is an homage to Cat People. This is just like the scene in Cat People where, what's her name, Gloria Holden, is walking alone in the night and is looking back over her shoulder because she hears something.
Footsteps.
Yeah. It's a very deliberate homage, and the influence of Val.
But it wasn't a set. It was actually done on the street because you could see their breath. So I was really surprised how many scenes were done using the full. I don't know what was done on the set. Probably maybe some of the interior scenes, but maybe not.
Well, you can that's the thing is that I think maybe just because it. I mean, it's just because it's not on this.
Low, right?
Just because it's not on. I think it might have been a studio lot. But
it had the outside, right?
Well, a studio lot can be outside.
Right.
There's tons of lots.
Right. Yeah. I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
But it's like,
yes.
It's like, and again, even in Tom Weaver's interview with Levon and Paul Landers, they talk about that, how it's like, well, we figured that you can. There's a lot of again, we talk about this with a lot of movies, how sometimes the exterior sequences are very compelling and the interior sequences are very plain and unexciting. The interior stuff in this movie is very good, and we had talked about that, where the camera moves very deliberately. And so we're never in a situation, even when the camera is technically in a wide shot, we're never in a situation where the characters all just stand in the middle frame. We're just looking dead on at them. There's always this sense of everything is moving around.
Yes.
And we especially see it in the scene where John Beale is with Dabbs Greer and the assistant. When they're first introduced, because this lab itself is bifurcated into two sections.
Right,
There's
around a bench.
Around a bench with all these animal cages on it. So while Dabbs and Beale are having their own conversation, the assistant is just going about his routine, and then once it's time for the assistant to actually become relevant, then the camera will move over, and it makes everything so lively.
Yeah, did you say what's the relationship to the werewolf? Because the werewolf is done the same way, where things come out of focus and into focus in terms of the whole set being shown, like in the bar scenes. Is it?
I mean, it's that's the thing. The werewolf doesn't really have the same. The werewolf does a lot of stuff with deep focus photography.
Right.
It does a lot of stuff where it frames events in terms of composing a shot in where you get a full perception of foreground information and background information.
Right.
So what we pointed out in The Werewolf was that wonderful opening shot in the bar where the background information and the stuff we're clearly supposed to follow, which is the character wandering in, going over to the fireplace to try to get warm, but what is in the foreground, but which is also also integral to the story, is just this guy coldly smoking a cigarette, planning on mugging this guy and coercing him. So that's something that movie does very well, and you also see it, of course, in the triumphalist scene at the very same setting after they've caught the werewolf and thrown him in jail. Everyone is getting drunk and there's all this conviviality in the background, but what we're focusing on is just this one hunter and the nurse, who both sort of acknowledge and realize that all of this stuff is basically a mirage. It's all like It's all basically denial, that everyone is just really afraid. So that's something that works very well in The Werewolf. What works very well in this movie is less to do with creating the depth in the image, I think, and more to do with very meticulously planning around
Motion.
Right. Yeah, to always, and which is great for a movie that is about a guy who is in an addictive state, a guy who's slowly descending into withdrawal and frenzy and, constantly needs more and more to meet a fix. You want to give this sense that the camera itself is almost impatient in a way. Like, the camera itself is like, there's all this stimulus, there's all this other information that's always occurring off screen,
Right?
And it makes you self-conscious in a way, because it's like, and of course it's also scarier, because what is occurring off screen, what is just out of the bounds of what I see as the reality of the film, and it makes us feel uncomfortable. But then when the camera moves, it creates the sense that, like, things aren't static. Everything is constantly moving and organic, and we're always moving towards. So it's almost like a demonstration of a similar premise of how you can use cinematography to communicate emotion and tell a story, rather than the camera itself merely being a receptacle for the actors to,
Right.
just deliver exposition. I think it's a really tremendously well done film in that regard.
And and she has done a remarkable job with the script, the writer, because and like you said, every obviously when you write a script, you not only write the lines, but you set up what the person's feeling. You give an idea of what the setting is, and his gradual disintegration and his fear for his daughter. He starts to push away from her, but it's done so subtly.
Dad? Are you mad at me or something?
Oh, honey. I've never been mad at you. I just want you to have a good home. And you can't have that here. With me. With me being gone all the time. Now, look, with Aunt Sally, she'd be there every day at home with you. Oh, now, look, honey. Please don't cry. Please don't. All right. We won't talk about it anymore. But you think about it, huh? Now, come on. I got a lot of patients to see today. A lot of things to finish up. Come on. That's my girl. I bet those eggs are stone cold by this time.
And again, like the werewolf, they have to send the loved ones away.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. I think it's a kind of an interesting way so you can focus on...
That's another very common thread between the two movies. Like, obviously...
And
it is... Yeah, and that's the thing. It is very interesting because one way that Bill Warren, the author of Keep Watching the Skies, the way he frames the werewolf is that it's the evolutionary dead end. Like, this is the moment where the novelty of science fiction creature features in alien movies and, Atom Age monsters, that's wearing off. And so now the new novelty is actually what's old. It's gothic monsters. But it's an evolutionary...
What a twist, right?
It's an evolutionary dead end because you're still working within a scientific rationalist framework, and you're taking the gothic horror monster, but depriving it of its... evocative qualities, like the idea of the full moon and of magic and of dark witchcraft and stuff. I think what these two movies demonstrate is that there's actually a wonderful quality in how the gothic horror is preserved, but once you marry these elements of gothic horror with a scientific rationalist framework, the thing you inevitably reveal is a sort of commentary on how the supposedly scientific rationalist elements of modern life, modern medicine, modern psychology,
right,
all of these things turn out to actually be like the full moon. They are in themselves sort of magical properties that can mean the difference between, of course, in both of these movies, very much interested in the idea of psychology and the idea of the mind. And isn't that interesting that, like, The Werewolf is sort of, again, a movie, almost like, you could say The Werewolf is a movie almost about, like, schizophrenia.
Right.
Like
Well,
of
they all-
how
yes.
society in its current state is not prepared to deal ethically with the issue of people who have profound psychological issues. And in this movie, what marrying the gothic horror tradition to a scientific rational explanation, what it offers you the ability to do is present this allegory for how waiting in the midst of all of this stuff that we see as normal and we see as very scientific and very carefully plotted out is something that can erode the mind, that can make us dependent and neurotic and, crumble at us. Like, both of these movies are very much about how perfectly mundane things turn
Right.
perfectly good men, perfectly unassuming, not too, like they're not necessarily, good family men, but not stereotypes. They're not
Right.
like, big masculine egoists. And it just takes these people and it just obliterates them. It just completely irreparably destroys them.
Right.
And society has no way of dealing with it because it literally can't like compartmentalize what to do with them, because even this guy, like, again, George Bailey, it almost is like the actual ending of It's a Wonderful Life is. The actual ending of It's a Wonderful Life is not that George Bailey suddenly realizes how valuable life is and chooses not to kill himself. The actual ending of It's a Wonderful Life is the vampire. A whole life of only ever giving and never having your own basic needs treated, and
Our aspirations.
or
Yeah.
your aspirations treated.
Yeah.
And I don't even mean
Right.
that in a libertarian thing, because the problem isn't that, I guess ultimately the problem isn't just that he's under pressure. The problem is that nobody can pay him. It's like, no one has the money to, like, actually, he's living in this context where it's like, no one is getting any assistance. So I'm the only one anyone ever comes to when they're in desperate need and they need that, they need this help. But this is what the actual ending is. George Bailey does not turn out all right at the end. George Bailey crumbles, he goes to the bar, he descends into alcoholism, and eventually he just snaps under the pressure. It's a very... again, it's not even a movie that's necessarily scary. It's just depressing. It's just, like,
Right.
thoroughly
Right.
tragic in a
Right,
way.
and I think that's the writer's intent. Maybe that's why a lot of the scenes were done off screen, because
Yeah.
the murders aren't really that important.
No, they're not. And even like, I guess, like, even in the scene where, like, again, the influence of Val Lewton is all over the place. Just, like, again, it's like you can tell that Fielder is not just somebody who, again, she's not like, an AIP, a person who you could get to write for an AIP movie or any number of these movies where they're merely fascinated by the tropes that have evolved out of sci-fi. And again, you can even look to the Monster of Piedras Blancas. As like, at a certain point, you can't blame everything in the Monster of Piedras Blancas on people just sort of rushing a film together. Because at a certain point, these are a bunch of people who have an idea of what they like about the movies that they've grown up with and made a career on. They like outsiders, like the lighthouse keeper who's feeding the monster. They like weird little, almost incestuous tensions between the father who lives in who wants to keep his daughter in the tower and the town boy. Like they and the monster itself being like a complex figure that could possibly have like humanoid intelligence. Like, it even ascends to the top of the lighthouse like King Kong. We have to have these allusions to it. But it's all pretense. Like, there's nothing really binding it together. No. What Fielder gives you is she's clearly a very astute in being able to internalize that, no, what really gets at people, what really makes them empathize with a monster is being able to know that this world is lived in, that it feels like our own, that characters have dimension, that it seems like they could realistically work together. And more importantly, that what really gets under your skin is the feeling of fatalism. It's the feeling that there's no going back, that at a certain point the switch is just flipped and we're just snowballing towards an inevitable and permanent decline in something. And it's just a thoroughly tragic film. And I can't really... It's weird, like, once we were done watching it, like, I more or less just thought, oh, that was pretty good. But the more I think about it, the more it just continues to grow in estimation in my mind. I think this might be one of the best films we've seen so far. This is a very...
I think it's one of the better written ones.
Yes, definitely.
And
best screenplay goes to Pat Field.
Yeah, I have to admit that. It's very tight. It's very, very tight. And I have to... The hats go off to everybody. The actors, and including the director. And the cameraman. You have to give all these people remarkable...
It does turn out the director of photography for this movie, he was the director of photography on Val Lewton's I Walked with a Zombie. So, there's you know.
Good. I recommend that people see this again. If you, like as I said in several of these podcasts, is that growing up with these films, you don't really appreciate some of the real artistry in some of these, and it's worthwhile just revisiting them again. And I think some of the ones that we selected are really good.
Yeah, I think we've got one more pairing coming up, just to round out the month. I think we're going to do Four Skulls of Jonathan Drake and Invisible Invaders. But also, we need to finally get into the can a bonus episode, and this one will be on the. You're a fan of Arch Hall Jr.
No, I'm not going to.
Oh, come on, you don't.
I like The Sadist. That's the best thing I think is a remarkable film. The Sadist.
Go see The Sadist.
Yeah.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we do The Sadist and Ega? Would you like to do?
We could do Sadist, but I don't know if I want to watch The Sadist again. That is the most disturbing picture I've seen.
All right, how about this? Because
I could watch it. But
I already did a poll like months ago, and people really want an episode on Wild Guitar.
Okay, fine.
I don't know why I keep pronouncing it Wild Guitar, because it's not even the characters aren't even Hicks. They're like Southern California.
Right.
Again, more downwardly mobile middle class. We'll get into the behind the scenes story, but yeah, we'll definitely do Wild Guitar and The Sadist. But you know. This is great. This is the one I know we have to do because I know it's...
Werewolf of London.
We'll get to Werewolf of London eventually. Maybe after break we can go into the sort of classic Universal period.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We definitely need to consider those classic Universal movies in a sequence. I definitely think that. And we'll see the Werewolf of London in that period. We'll also see... We got to see Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in that period.
Which one?
The original,
Spencer Tracy's?
1932.
Well, that's the best one.
Yeah, the one with all of the point of view photography, brilliantly made movie. But yeah, no, seeing you react to The Sadist like that tells me that's what we have to see, because I've mentioned
he's such a good portrayal.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, talk about nutcases.
I've mentioned this before.
There isn't much, I don't think there's ever been a more sadistic movie with limited perspective. It's done well. It's really shot well. Who was his father?
I forget. I think his father produced it.
I mean, whoever did that, that's worthwhile for people to watch once. It's black and white.
Yeah. This is the thing. I've mentioned this before. This is how I know something is going to be good. If it's so disturbing that you don't even look forward to the prospect of watching it again, then I know we'll have to cover it, and maybe one day we'll also cover it.
I told you that when you were younger. I said, there's this film I saw. Yeah. That was the...
Yeah, this is one of the original, you have to see this. But it was also one of the original, you have to see it. I'm not going to see it because it scares the bejesus out of me.